Hello, welcome to our special webcast, Mike's on Common Core. This is Mike Petrilli at the Thomas B. Fordham Institute, and joining me is Mike McShane, Research Fellow at the American Enterprise Institute.
Yes.
Welcome, Mike.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Of course, thanks for doing this on short order. You can tell by our casual Friday dress that this is an idea we had about, 3 hours ago. So
it's not a subtle homage to Rick Hess.
Yes.
No.
No. If it was an homage to Rick Hess, we would not be
shorts.
wearing pants. That's right. We would be wearing shorts instead. So the reason that it made sense for us to do this is, of course, that there was big news this week. Oklahoma has immediately pulled out of the Common Core. Governor Fallon just signed a bill that would immediately revert Oklahoma to its old standards and come up with new standards different than the Common Core within 2 years. We'll talk about that. South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley has also signed a bill pulling her state out of the Common Core. They stay in, I think, for a year while they come up with new standards. We've seen Indiana already pull out, sort of, and adopt standards that were very similar to the Common Core. There's a bill on the desk of the Missouri Governor, Jay Nixon, to pull Missouri out. I think it gives them 2 years to come up with new standards, and a big debate happening in North Carolina right now as well. So a lot of people out there around the country who are working on this issue, as well as folks in the media, are curious about what this means for the Common Core. You're somebody who's been following this issue. Mike is the author. Let me get the book right here. Common Core Meets Education Reform, an edited volume that you did with Rick Hess at AEI. Also started your career as an inner city teacher.
It was.
In where? In Montgomery, Alabama.
In Alabama, how appropriate to our conversation.
And I've been to Montgomery, among the many state capitals I've gotten to visit.
You went to the restaurant
and I went to the restaurant you said,
yeah, Davis Cafe. Can't miss.
It was great. Thank you for the recommendation. Absolutely. All right, Mike. So let's go ahead and get started. Oh, and by the way, I should say to the folks out there watching, we very much want this to be an interactive discussion. I've got my iPhone at the ready. Going to try to do my best to follow along with your tweets, particularly questions. You can tweet that to hashtag Mike's on CCSS. Okay,
yes,
so again,
cool.
Mike's on CCSS, and you'll follow. You can kind of keep me honest. You know, they say that multitasking is not something they recommend in general, and that men in particular are bad at it. But,
all right.
But we're going to get going. Michelle says let's get going with the discussion. So let's do it. So first of all, what do you think? Is this the beginning of the end for the Common Core?
Well, I think it kind of depends on how we define the sort of end of the Common Core, or what it means for a state to quote unquote get out of the Common Core. You know, so you sort of hinted with Indiana. So it's like if your legislature says, all right, we're out of the standards, but then you adopt standards that are relatively similar to them, what does that mean? If you have the standards but don't participate in one of the two testing consortia, what does that mean? So I think that we're most likely to see more states do what Oklahoma did, meaning that the legislature will come out and say, we're against the Common Core, we need to develop our own standards. What that actually means for like the teacher in the classroom is tough to say.
Now, I should have warned you, Mike, the way this is going to work is I'm going to ask you a question, and then I'm going to explain how you're wrong, and I'm going to give the correct answer.
Okay, sounds good.
I'm just teasing, but I'm half teasing. I'm half teasing, but I get to be host and panelist at the same time. Here's where I think that you may be wrong in terms of additional states. Sure. I mean, why is this all happening right now? It's all a matter of the legislative calendar, right? I mean, we have, right now, we're in June. It is the end of the legislative session in states across the country. So they're getting to the very end of their process. And so as you would expect, this is when states are finally getting these laws across the finish line and to governors' desks. Once this slate goes through, once we get through, you know, Oklahoma's done, South Carolina's done, we've got a few more. I'm really just Missouri, North Carolina's hanging out there. That's it. You know, most state legislatures are done for the year, right?
Sure.
And they don't come back again until January. And so, for one thing, a couple months from now, you're going to all of a sudden feel like, oh, what happened to all that momentum about states pulling out of the Common Core? This is it for 2014. The question's going to be for 2015. There's going to be surely more efforts. Are we going to see more states? But keep this in mind too, Mike. Look, states that had big battles this year on the Common Core: Alabama, Arizona, Florida, Georgia, Kansas, Mississippi, Tennessee, Wisconsin. You know, a lot of those states where people really thought that there was a good chance that those legislatures were going to pull out of the Common Core, and in the end, they did not. And so, look, you win some, you lose some. I think this is probably it for 2014.
Oh, okay, so for 2014, that could absolutely be true. But, you know, the legislatures will come back into session.
Right.
And so there'll be more opportunities in the future. And also, I think it's important to note that this is happening before any of the real sort of teeth of the standards take place, before any of the tests count for teacher or school evaluation systems. So most of this is sort of, I think, what you hinted at. It's more of an ideological opposition to the Common Core. When it starts to affect the sort of material interests of teachers or schools, I mean, then I think this is just like the baby boomlet, you know, like a little boom at the beginning. I think there's a much greater likelihood when that happens to see even more fervent pushback.
Right. Now, most people would expect that that pushback is going to come more on the left, right? I mean, what you've seen so far is almost entirely a conservative pushback. At least these states we're talking about, like Oklahoma, like South Carolina. I mean,
South Carolina,
these are the most conservative states in the country, right? Arguably, it's only in New York that we've had any kind of pushback on the left or significant pushback from the teacher groups. And you may be right. It may be because they already are doing testing. Yeah. They already have those higher cut scores and those lower test results. So, you know, some people think that is a precursor of what's to come in other places. And that's to see. What's your take? You know, we at Fordham, look, obviously we support the Common Core. You know, but we try to call it like we see it as well. And what we see out there in the primaries right now is, for the most part, Common Core supporters have been winning. These incumbents, that the Republican incumbents who have stood up for the Common Core, are not losing in primaries. There's been a handful of examples where they did, but by and large, the legislators and even the state school board members are surviving. What's your take on that?
Well, I mean, it's going to vary from place to place. One example, I think you and I were exchanging emails about this earlier, like in Alabama. Yes, the pro-Common Core folks won, but they had to spend 5 times what their opponents did.
That's fair.
So,
that's true.
I mean, I think that the idea is that there is a cost to supporting the Common Core in a very literal definition of the term cost. So you could still win. It's not necessarily going to be a make or break issue. And I think that makes sense. A lot of the polling that's out there, if you look at, particularly on the right, what do people care about? They care about Medicaid expansion. They care about regulation. They care about tax policy, all that sort of stuff. So the Common Core is on the list. And it's sort of, look, the right now is in this sort of moment of trying to define the various sort of camps that exist within it. The quote-unquote establishment, the quote-unquote Tea Party, or all of these different groups are always sort of in flux. And that sort of set of issues that defines you in one of those camps is always changing. So right now it appears that the Common Core is sort of opposition to the Common Core places you as one of those insurgents or Tea Party members. So it's a way to sort of identify with that. And so I think as we look at states around the country, you know, I think to understand the Common Core in primaries, Henry Olson's piece, The Four Faces of the Republican Party, I think is like helps explain so much.
No, it's a great piece.
You know, because it's talking about how often we tend to set up as like there's establishment and then there's insurgents or Tea Party, whatever. But there's really sort of those 4 groups within the Republican Party. You have moderates to liberals. I wrote the numbers out. Moderates to liberals, which is about a quarter to a third. Somewhat conservative folks, 35 to 40%. Very conservative evangelicals, which make up about 20% of the Republican electorate. And very conservative secular folks, which are about 5 to 10%. But, I mean, those evangelicals, who I think would probably be those that are most associated with opposition to the Common Core, you know, they're not, that 20% isn't spread randomly across America, you know, in many of those states that we talked about. So if we look at the states that have gotten rid of the Common Core, so like Indiana, 31% evangelical state, South Carolina, 36%, Oklahoma is the second most evangelical state in the country, 46%. So that is going to sort of skew the Republican electorate towards probably more Common Core opposition.
So one more political question, and we want to talk about some other stuff. But so when you think about this in terms of a presidential election, that article argued that in the end, you're going to have candidates who are going to try to claim the mantle of being somewhat conservative, right? Those are the ones who end up winning when you think about it, Mitt Romney or McCain, well, winning the primary.
Yes.
Or George W. Bush and others who have actually won the presidency. And so the question is, can a somewhat conservative candidate still be in favor of the Common Core?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I mean, I think that's, part of the logic of that article is you sort of have to win your group and then try and bring the other groups to you. So I think the Common Core is not a make or break issue with the sort of moderate to liberal wing of the Republican Party. It's not a make or break issue for the sort of somewhat conservative wing. So I think that if that's your base, the Common Core isn't a make or break issue for it.
Which explains why, Bobby Jindal clearly has decided he's going to go for the evangelicals.
I think that would make a lot of sense.
And so,
as folks sort of shift between those different groups, you can see them starting to signal, I think, towards trying to win over that particular faction within the Republican Party.
Okay, let's stop the politics. But by the way, keep sending us questions. I've not seen a whole lot of questions yet, but some folks are following along, so we like that. Here's an educational question. We'll get to this about the rollout. Do we need to go slower? So let's talk about the educational impact, first of all, of these decisions. So take a place like Oklahoma. So as of right now, they're done with the Common Core. They go back to their old standards that we thought were decent. Okay, they were they weren't among they were okay. And then in 2 years, they come out with new standards again. And there's some phrases in there about how they're not supposed to have anything to do with the Common Core. As your colleague Rick has pointed out, that's going to be hard since it is just reading and math. Right?
Yeah, totally.
And the legislature has the authority to amend the standards, which seems like a bad idea as well. But okay, that happened. What goes on now in Oklahoma? I mean, to me, this seems like a disaster for coherence and focus on teaching and learning. They're going to have all this questions around what they're supposed to teach, what the test is going to look like. Is that a big problem?
It's a tough time of the year to choose to change your standards for next year, for the year after. So a place like South Carolina and others have given a couple-year grace period. But I mean, when you're talking about trying to develop accountability systems or assessments or teacher evaluation systems that rely on longitudinal data, I mean, it's a mess.
It's a mess. And so, look, again, I support the Common Core, so I see this a certain way. But make the argument. How is this good for kids in Oklahoma or South Carolina or Missouri? Is there any argument that this is somehow going to help them?
I think the argument, which I'm making for argument's sake, not necessarily that, but is the idea that making these sort of short-term adjustments or displacing things in the short term in order to achieve a solid long-term goal. So if you think the Common Core is that toxic, then disrupting education...
Toxic politically or
toxic educationally. So if you think it's that toxic educationally, having disruptions in the short term is less important to get rid of it. Okay. I think that's what, if a person that fully believed that was sitting where I was sitting, that's what they'd be saying.
Okay. And to be clear, I mean, you've tried to stay fairly neutral on the Common Core itself.
I've described myself as like a committed Common Core agnostic. My issues have always been more with the sort of implementation challenges that I thought such an enormous project would have. And I think some of those concerns proved prescient. We're talking about them now.
Yes. Okay. So let's talk about that. Let's start talking about implementation. So there was this point here from Kimberly Reeves about should the rollout of the Common Core have been slower. Example, NPR this week did a couple of big segments on their premiere shows about Common Core in the classroom, and in particularly around curricular materials, and quoted some people, including Amber Northern here at Fordham, saying, here's the problem is that the stuff just isn't ready yet. I mean, it takes a while to develop aligned materials. The textbook publishers slapped Common Core line and everything, but even they will admit, look, we're working on better stuff, but it takes a while. It's just starting to emerge. That's a serious problem, right?
Yeah, no, it absolutely is, and especially if we're going to start holding schools and teachers accountable to teaching standards that they don't have the materials to teach yet.
Right.
I mean, that's problematic.
So, but what was the option? I mean, it just takes a while, right? I mean, they adopt the standards, then, it takes a while to develop the curriculum, develop the test. States have already, by and large, said we're going to have some kind of grace period where we're not going to hammer schools or hammer teachers that don't do well. So, I mean, aren't we dealing with that the best we can?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's tough to go back and replay history. The thoughts of maybe doing one set of the standards, like just doing English language arts and making sure that that's all on point before doing mathematics, as opposed to trying to do it all at once in some grades as opposed to others to try and do it. But no, I mean, this is one of the, but I mean, part of that is to think so that's part of the whole Common Core idea, was to be this big giant thing that was kind of happening all at once, which might be some of the hubris of the enterprise as a whole, right? So it's like, we're going to have to do this giant disruptive thing, and then we're sort of surprised when it disrupts everything.
Right. Well, I don't think most of us were surprised, right? I mean, but have been trying to figure out how to get ahead of it as best as we can. And where I would argue that the rollout has gone too fast is in New York, where for whatever reason they rushed ahead and put in place this so-called Common Core test, which I have no idea if it's truly aligned. A lot of people who have seen items are skeptical about that it's truly aligned to the Common Core, but it has certainly seems to have poisoned the well in New York, and I'm not sure what they got out of that rather than just waiting on the same timetable like everybody else.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what they were thinking there.
You know, I mean, and so this is the question, though. Now, what you see in New York, and what we see is this pushback among teachers, among some affluent parents, right? These so-called white suburban moms that Arne Duncan famously talked about.
Yes.
I mean, do you expect to see that in all of these other states? Or is the fact that we have a couple more years to get our act together, is that going to help?
I mean, I would imagine that someone of a liberal persuasion could write The Four Faces of the Democratic Party, which would tell a similar story here. So you have some, I think, a large number of people on the left that are against standardized testing. I think many of them are in affluent communities and others. They think, you know, their eyes show that their schools do a pretty good job. Their kids get into the colleges that they want to. So any of these sort of centralized plans, and the thing is that the Common Core, while initially starting something sort of separate from that, gets subsumed into that whole thing. So it's Common Core becomes synonymous with testing and accountability, which they already don't like. Yeah. So I think there are lots of those communities around the country that are going to push back against that, and the Common Core is just going to become part of that conversation.
Yeah. Here's a great question from David Allen on Twitter. He asks, are other schools seeing social studies and science being cut? He said, at my school, social studies and science are now every other day. I'm not sure if that's elementary school, middle, high school, probably elementary, but I'm not sure. This is a serious question here, Mike, and I'd love your thoughts on this. Those of us at Fordham and many of our allies, one of the reasons we really like the Common Core, especially for English language arts, is that they are very clear when they say that these standards have got to be complemented with a content-rich curriculum, right? Virtually quoting E.D. Hirsch, right, and the founder of the Core Knowledge Program, and talking about how once kids learn to decode, little kids, right, kids my age, I've got my age, my kids' age.
Met them, they're totally adorable.
They are, right. My son Nico's in kindergarten, right? Once they learn to decode, and even before then, the way they're going to learn how to read is if they build up a strong vocabulary and if they know something about the topics they're reading, which means you've got to build a coherent curriculum to teach history, to teach science, music, art, literature, and yet that direction from the Common Core, as far as I can tell, has been completely overlooked. I mean, at least I don't see any evidence outside of New York, where core knowledge is part of their state curriculum, that schools get it, that they're actually supposed to be teaching more history, more science, to this teacher's point, particularly in elementary schools. How do we break through and get that message out?
Well, I mean, you have to think that the Common Core has to be implemented by teachers. So the 3.3 or 3.4 million teachers that are already there, and the couple 100,000 that we induce into the workforce every year. Yep. So we have to have confidence that the professional development that teachers are receiving to alter their instruction to align to the Common Core is going to help them actually do that. Well, we know the research on PD is not that promising, right? They're only the most intense programs, lots of follow-up, et cetera. If you talk to a lot of teachers, the Common Core PD that they're getting right now, generally speaking, is not fundamentally changing the way that they teach in the ways that I think a lot of supporters of the Common Core might say. And I think we see the same thing in teacher preparation programs. If you think about it, there's no real thing that we can do to sort of force colleges of education to teach, to prepare teachers to teach aligned to the Common Core. You know, if the people that are there don't like the Common Core, they have the academic freedom and they have the ability to not do that. So that was also something that I think was left out of a lot of this. A lot of hand-waving was done that was like, well, we have all these teachers that already teach one way. We want them to teach this new way. How are we going to do it?
And I get it if you're trying to convince them to teach something that they just don't agree with at all, right? We did a little focus group as part of a project for this conference we did for E.D. Hirsch Jr., talking to elementary school teachers, saying, would you like to teach more history and science? Yeah. And they say, sure, that sounds great. I mean, this doesn't seem like it should be a hard sell, right?
Yeah, I think, but it is a paradigm shift. People have been used to teaching in a particular way. They're used to being evaluated a particular way. Instructional leaders within the school are used to a certain thing. So, I mean, it's a big shift that needs to take place. Even if it could be a welcome shift or a shift that ultimately people agree with, change has to happen, and that's difficult.
Now, a lot of people would say, okay, what really matters then is what's in the textbooks, right? That once the curriculum materials come out, that a lot of teachers, for better or for worse, rely heavily on these things. I sometimes feel like my son, I don't see the Montgomery County, Maryland curriculum. I see the Scholastic curriculum, as far as I can tell, based on the worksheets coming home. That it's the textbook companies. We saw back in the Reading First days, another contentious issue, that one of the successes there was that it did change the way the publishers dealt with early reading. You go to any early reading program on the market just about now, and they all do at least a reasonable job with scientifically based reading instruction, right? Phonics, phonemic awareness. We're not having the reading wars anymore about whether or not kids need to be taught those basics like we were back in the 90s. So, isn't it possible that if we could get the publishers on board with the idea of, hey, we want coherent, content-rich curriculum, science, history, etc., starting in kindergarten, first, second, third, fourth grade, that would change teacher practice. Maybe that's the way to go.
I mean, I think it's possible, but I still think that's only one piece of the puzzle. I mean, like, there's part of, if we actually think that the pedagogy has to change, the way people teach has to change, textbooks are just one part of that. I think they're an important part, you're absolutely right, but I think more change would need to happen in order for that to go into place.
Yep. All right, good. Lots more questions coming in here. Let's talk about the tests. Some people want to know about the tests.
Absolutely.
And so EdWeek just today had an analysis that said that 58% of American students will not be taking the PARCC or Smarter Balance test next year. That's interesting. Some people think, well, then this whole enterprise is at risk because the testing is not coming along with the Common Core. What's your take on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think that right now, by looking at the same education, so 10 states are in PARCC, 17 are in SBAC, 18 use some other test, and 6 are undecided at that point. Yeah. So I mean, I think on one level, the thoughts now that the Common Core curriculum will have the common piece of it in there is dwindling away, right? And I think this increases the likelihood that states will adopt the Common Core sort of in name only. We are aligned to the Common Core, but we're basically given the same tests that we used to. We're sort of just going to do the same stuff that we always did.
Right.
So, I mean, I think that that's a very real possibility. But look, I think, so if I'm a Common Core supporter, I loved Checker in only like his Checker way of responding sort of Oklahoma's situation, which was like, all right, good riddance. Well, if they're not going to do it, don't do it. I mean, maybe as a Common Core supporter, you say.
By the way, Checker was not following the talking points that he was given. He does not follow talking points.
Good luck trying to do it.
Exactly.
No, but I mean, like, part of it says maybe it's better to have that dedicated cadre of a smaller number of states that really want to do this, have the capacity to do it, and then allowing this sort of laboratories of democracy thing, other states say like, hey, I really like what they're doing. They seem to be using a test that we really like, and building support for the Common Core that way. I think could actually be. So we saw this massive expansion. I think we're seeing a contraction. If those folks that really, if you're right that the Common Core is great, and that these tests are so much better. One would hope that states would see that and say, hey, I really like what they're doing over there. The tests are cheaper because we don't have to have it made specifically for us. They're higher quality. We like them better. We're going to go that way.
And let me be clear. We don't know yet that the tests are better. We hope that they're better.
Exactly.
And we hope to be doing some work to dig into that a little bit more. What's your sense? I mean, are you hopeful that these tests, even, well, the consortia tests, but also the other ones, will turn out to be better than what we've got now, that they're going to address some of the concerns around testing that we've got, that the cut scores are going to be higher? What's your sense on any of that?
I mean, I have to say I'm somewhat skeptical about a lot of that, especially now that the tests are all, I mean, even in the first place, I wasn't sure, even if every state chose to use the same test, what mechanism would require all of them to use the same cut score. Like, I don't look at teacher preparation, the praxis exam, right? Well, everybody takes the same test. Every state will choose to set different cut scores for it. So this is before all the states chose to fracture into their own tests. So now they get to make their own and set their own cut scores. And every sort of political pressure in my mind is to push those downward.
Well, of course, and that's a lot of what got us started down this road. To begin with, though, I am hopeful that now with all the press attention on this, that it's going to be so obvious if states come out and continue to report that 80% of their kids are proficient, or if they start to say 80% of our kids are college ready, and the NAEP says it's 30%. I mean, I really do think it's going to be harder for states to pull that off and get away with it, and that you're not going to see that as much. That you're going to see the cut scores, at least, being pitched at a high level. Now, there'll be some nuance. They may say, this is our cut score for what it means to be college and career ready, but we're not going to actually attach stakes to that. You know, the score we use for our school report cards, or for, you know, promotion to the third grade, or for high school graduation, is going to be some lower bar, right? And I think you're going to see a lot of that kind of stuff. My big worry, though, is even if, look, and that's a big win. Let's be honest. If we just get states to start reporting more honestly to parents and to the community about how many kids are or are not on track for college and career, that's a huge success. And I do think even with all this fracturing, we're going to get there. What I don't know we're going to get with these other tests is whether or not they're going to be truly aligned to the Common Core in a way that's going to improve teaching and learning. This is where I buy the argument that there's been a lot of bad teaching and learning in the No Child Left Behind era because we've got these low-level tests. And so it has worked. If teachers teach in this very sort of low-level way, drill and kill, it has worked in some respects to boost test scores. And we put all this pressure on the teachers to boost test scores. So this is what you get. If we're going to keep the pressure on teachers, and I think we are, then you want to have much better tests that encourage a much different kind of teaching that's much higher, that's more challenging, that's richer, that's the kind, right? And it's that I don't know we're going to get with these off-the-shelf tests.
So one worry is with the off-the-shelf tests, which I think is totally legit. I definitely am with you on that we don't know what those have. But the other piece of it, I think what you were talking about strikes at the core of going back to talking about teachers. So we've been spending the last, well, I wasn't, because when No Child Left Behind passed, I was in 11th grade, but folks have been pushing for a long time. That was a little age dig on you right there. No,
yes, exactly. That's fine.
No, folks have been trying to convince teachers that the tests that they're being held accountable to and that their school is being judged by are meaningful and quality and worth supporting, right? And now, to switch to these new tests, we're all saying that, no, the old tests were terrible. So if I'm a teacher right now, my question is, why believe you now?
Right.
Like, why should we believe these new tests? You guys just brought me on to believe that the old tests were good. Now you're telling me the old tests are bad, but these new tests are going to be better? So, I think it's dangerous footing to sort of, to be on right now.
Well, right, and so we got to get in there and take a look at them. Look, John White gave a great speech this week in Louisiana, the Louisiana State Superintendent, and first of all took some digs at Governor Jindal, who has been an ally of his, but for turning his back on Common Core and on Park. And John White saying, look, we have got to stop changing our minds and jerking you guys around. You need consistency. You need to know what the plan is. In Louisiana, they have a 10-year plan for how they're going to implement the Common Core. And he defended Park and said, you deserve better tests than we have given you in the past. But you're right. So far, that's still mostly a hope. And we need to get in there and be able to see more about what's on those tests.
Absolutely.
In order to
look, it doesn't help. I remember, if you go back and read the speech Secretary Duncan gave announcing the grants for these new tests, that was not helpful. Talking about how people will be able to do science experiments, and it was basically, we'll cure all of the ills of testing. So I think we have to be more realistic, particularly
this is the administration that is going to heal the planet and stop the oceans from rising.
Exactly. But we have to be more realistic about that. These tests will be a sort of step improvement over this. They're not going to solve every problem that people have with tests, especially if the test providers want to keep costs low and others. Developing these high quality assessment items are really expensive, and they take time and multiple applications and stuff. So it's a process.
Yeah, but come on, shame on states for being penny wise and pound foolish on this one, right? Sure. Georgia that still wants to have a $10 test. Georgia, the state where there's a huge cheating scandal. You say,
this is true.
I'm shocked that a $10 test could be cheated on.
It's true, I'm with you, but it's trying to spend money for unpopular stuff in tight fiscal environments puts anybody in a tough spot.
Come on,
anybody in a tough spot. It totally
too easy
does.
on these guys.
No, it totally does. Don't get me wrong, they may ultimately be wrong in this, but think of, when in pension obligations and all that sort of stuff, you want to go to a room full of folks and say, I'm not going to, we have $120 million to spend or whatever, we can top off the pensions or we can put it towards standardized testing.
Right.
I understand where they're coming from. They may be wrong, but I get it.
All right. One last topic. Several folks are asking about federal policy here. Okay, so one last thing we haven't talked about. I just lost here it is. Let's see, Don Long, your idea of a committed cadre of states that do Common Core right as labs of democracy is one of the best I heard about the future. That's very nice. And I think he then said something about, what about...
Brandeis, but then...
Yes, and what was it?
100 years ago.
Shoot, I've lost it. But it was about, however, how does the federal
government gonna do?
Role have to do with that? So, look, I think many of us could make the argument that this whole thing would have played out very differently if the Obama administration had just stayed out of it. But that would happen going forward How do you see this playing out? Is Oklahoma going to lose its waiver? Are we going to see some states lose race to the top grants? I mean, what does the administration? What's the next move for the administration on this?
Look, this is part of the sort of broader waiver problem. That Rick Hess has written about a lot. It's like every state, you would assume, is somehow out of step with what they promised in their waiver. Yeah. And the question is sort of what will the administration prioritize as means to lose it? I think if they were to take a stand on this, it would be catastrophic to the support of the Common Core. If they say, because you all got rid of Common Core, because whatever, we're going to want to check out your standards or whatever, I think that would be unbelievably problematic for the political, particularly on the political side, for support of these things.
No, I agree. And what about on the testing? Same deal on the test?
Yeah, absolutely.
Even though the feds do have authority to oversee the state testing system in terms of making sure it's valid and reliable, blah, 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 blah.
Sure, but still the optics of it are difficult.
I agree. So let's look right in the eye to Arnie Duncan and you say, butt out, Mr. Secretary.
You're the one trying to sell the Common Core to everybody. You got to be telling.
Hey, I've been saying it. Are you kidding me? I've been saying it forever. It hasn't been working. Okay, I thought maybe if you did it, maybe he'd listen to you.
Yeah, sorry.
He doesn't listen to me.
I definitely don't think he listens to me. So.
All right, well, and we'll see. There's supposed to be a decision on Indiana shortly. Oklahoma, in the last days in Oklahoma, there was a debate about whether they'd lose their waivers. A lot of the educators are afraid of that in Oklahoma and try to make an issue out of it. There were some ads showing all the schools in Oklahoma that would be on the failing schools list again and could be turned into charter schools and would be eligible for choice. And anyways, that clearly was not a message that resonated with the governor in the end. All right, so you think they've got to butt out. But let's do the little armchair thing. If this had not been a part of the race to the top, where do you think we would be today? Do you think we would be with fewer states in the Common Core than we have today?
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
So I think the best case scenario, if you look back on that as a Common Core supporter, is you would have a small number of very committed states, right? That folks would have done this, would have come together and
you could argue you'd have the 27 states that today are still in Common Core and still in Parker Smarter Balanced, right? Maybe a handful more will come in the end. Right, and so you'd have...
And to me, that is how you actually build a lasting political coalition for something. Right. You don't have people chase federal grants for one time in the height of the Great Recession. You actually try and help them develop policies that help children and then learn from one another. So...
And I have to say, Mike, even though we really talked about how we were going to be at each other's throats, I agree with you on that one 100%.
See, look at this.
Kumbaya, baby. Kumbaya.
Right?
Yes. All right. Mike McShane of the American Enterprise Institute. This is Mike Petrilli of the Thomas B. Fordham Institute. Thanks so much for tuning in. Continue to follow along on our Common Core Watch blog for everything happening in Common Core. This issue is not going away.
No, it's not.
And many more turns to come. Thanks so much.